G'day you gorgeous people and welcome back to Politics Made OK. I just wanted to start with saying a huge thank you for the support you guys all showed me in last week's episode. I've received so many messages and I really appreciate it. Please subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be talking about the culture in Parliament House and my experiences working there in lots of episodes in the future. In the meantime, I'm kind of sitting here gobsmacked about the fact that it's 2 weeks from Christmas.
Santa's coming to town!
Santa! Oh my God!
And that means we're slowing down, we're wrapping up the year, and hopefully all taking some very well-deserved time off. The question is, where can you go? This week we're going to be looking at borders, where on earth you're able to go in your summer holidays, and the politics behind it all. I'm going to explain all that before, of course, wrapping up the week that was in 60 seconds on this week's show, the PMO. Looking pretty good there for a bit for the end of 2021. There was light at the end of the tunnel, hope on the horizon. We all had our bags packed for a Bali holiday and then a new COVID variant struck. Yeah, thanks Omicron. So now here we are, facing yet another moment of hope being snatched away from us and of course, total confusion about all the rules going on in the country. Now I'm going to try and explain the border situation. I'll be honest, it took me hours getting this straight in my own head. But here it goes. If you're in the ACT, New South Wales, Victoria, like me, you can travel anywhere between those states. All of those jurisdictions were allowing quarantine-free international travel, but then of course, Omicron. Now, if you go overseas and return to any of those states or territories, you're gonna have to quarantine for 3 days and return a negative test before being let out. South Australia's response to Omicron was even more intense. It brought back a 2-week quarantine for all international arrivals and a 7-day quarantine for anyone from a jurisdiction where there's community transmission and a vaccination rate below 80%. Now, if you're in Queensland, Tasmania or the Northern Territory, domestic borders look like they're coming down in the next week and a half. Wouldn't that be a Christmas miracle? But there will still be some rules in place. Queensland is going to require domestic travellers from hotspots like in New South Wales and Victoria to return a negative test 72 hours before arrival. It will also require overseas travellers to return a negative test and quarantine for up to 14 days. To get into Tasmania from overseas, you're going to need to produce a negative test 72 hours before you land. And if you're from a hotspot area, you're probably still going to have to quarantine for 14 days for quite a while yet. The NT has a 7-day quarantine in place for overseas arrivals, but only until December 20, after which it should be quarantine-free. But anyone entering from like New South Wales or Victoria will still have to quarantine for 7 days. And finally, WA has no date for when its border is reopening. Right now, only people from Tasmania and Queensland are allowed in, but we're all kind of wondering how that's going to go when they reopen to the country and the world. Well, that was all totally clear, right? But let's move on to overseas travel. There are a bunch of countries which you definitely can't go. They're countries where this new Omicron variant actually started. I'm talking about like South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Mozambique. And there are other countries that are just not allowing foreign travellers to come in, like Vietnam. And what about the all-popular Aussie tourism favourite of Bali? Well, they actually lifted their ban on foreign tourists in October. But then Omicron happened. And now there's a 10-day quarantine. And because of that, only like 150 people have applied for tourist visas. Yeah, we miss you too, Bali. But don't worry, there are a bunch of places you can go over your summer holidays and return quarantine-free, if you're from the right state. You've got like the UK, Canada, the US, Costa Rica, Sri Lanka, Jamaica, Fiji, Cambodia, Singapore, India, Portugal, Denmark, Ireland, Italy, Norway, Poland, the Netherlands, Germany, France, and Austria, and that's just naming a few. For some of these places, like the UK, you're going to have to go into quarantine before you return a negative COVID test. But otherwise, it's finally time to get jet setting. So lastly, let's just touch on the politics of our domestic and international borders. Internationally, the whole world is just holding its breath over Omicron. We're expecting the final data about this variant to come out by the end of the year. Now, some people, like top World Health Organization officials, they say, well, it's probably going to be less severe than former variants. So that's good, right? On the other hand, there have been studies released this week that show that vaccines are a little less effective against this variant. At this point, a sack full of coal is looking like a more attractive Christmas gift, right? Domestically, it's a whole other story. I don't know if you guys remember this thing called National Cabinet. Yeah, I barely do either. There was hope that there'd be some consistency about like state borders, lockdowns, what everyone considers a hotspot. But then you had a lot of the states who just kind of went, yeah, Nah. Now this is all because Australia is a federation. And that means all the states actually do wield a fair bit of power in their own jurisdictions. But why is the government putting a bit less pressure on states like WA to reopen or even just set a date of reopening? Because it knows that people are actually grateful to their premiers for keeping them safe. A lot of people in WA are still glad that they live in the hermit kingdom because when strains like Omicron come up and all that uncertainty that goes with them, well, people from WA feel like they're some of the safest in the country. On the other hand, there are some people in WA who are pretty annoyed at the hardline border stance from stopping them seeing their families in other states. And losing Perth the Ashes test. Now, given that Mark McGowan isn't really the biggest fan of the PM and has turned a lot of West Aussies against Scott Morrison, well, him sitting back and just kind of waiting for McGowan's popularity to wane, even just a little, it's a pretty good play. And as a result of easing off the pressure on states to open up their borders, it's a little surprise that the federal government gave its clearest indication yet that the election is going to be as late as possible. That little hint was given in the sitting calendar released a couple of weeks ago, which shows that a budget is going to be in March and that there's this really convenient big gap in May, the latest month the federal government can hold an election. How convenient. So I hope that's explained a bit of what's going on with our borders and maybe has given you the confidence to pack your bags and go wherever you can, depending on where you live. As always, before we finish up the episode, I'm going to end it with the speediest rundown of what's gone on in federal politics in the last 7 days. And it all starts now. Labor is defending its climate policy and says it's going to create, not shed jobs from the economy, but critics say that it's just a reheated version of what the party took to the 2019 election. The federal government is going to try and regulate the buy now, pay later and cryptocurrency platforms, which have kind of been doing whatever the hell they want. Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg have approached Gladys Berejiklian to run for the federal seat of Warringah. Australia is joining a US-led boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics and won't send any government officials to those games. Nationals MP George Christensen was on an alt-right web series and laughed when the host compared Australia's quarantine system to the Nazi Germany concentration camps. A news poll shows that a lot of people reckon Labor is going to win the next election, but that number is down on what it was ahead of the unlosable election in 2019. Sorry, Bill Shorten. The federal government is speeding up a $1.3 billion manufacturing strategy to protect Australia from supply chain disruptions, also known as China's wrath, and Deputy PM Barnaby Joyce has caught the Rona in America and is currently isolated. Yeah, even a quiet week up on the hill is still insane. But that brings us to the end of another show of PMO. As much as I really need a holiday, I won't be packing my bags just yet. So make sure you like and subscribe to the channel and I'll keep running down what's going on up here in Canberra every single week. For those of you that are getting out of here, I hate you. I'm just kidding. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Bon Voyage and all that jazz. And I'll catch you next time on Politics Made OK.